When the CFP Board puts out information, much of the advisory community tends to listen closely. They recently shared an article with 5 really important components of building an investment portfolio, and I think federal employees planning retirement would be smart in hearing what they have to say. But why should you care about what the CFP Board says? There are so many designations in the financial business, and only a handful of them really have the credibility and rigor that's worth talking about. And the CFP Board of Standards is the organization behind the correct process for financial planning, as well as the required education, experience, examination, background checks, and so forth. This is similar to the medical boards that license and regulate doctors and other medical practitioners. I myself am a CFP credentialed advisor, and so are all of the retirement planners that I have at my firm. So all of that to say, the CFP Board is a credible source of information, and it's worth hearing what they have to say about portfolio management. So let's get into what they're saying. Here's the article that I'm referring to, and October is National Financial Planning Month, which is why they are bringing this back up. So there you go with that almost worthless factoid. And as we start to look into here, diversification serves as a safeguard during market fluctuations, mitigating risks and fostering stable returns if executed wisely. So really, this is the reason why diversification is important. Since stock markets are unpredictable and uncertain, downturns are virtually expected for long-term investors, and so portfolio diversification and managing that correctly is essential. Okay, so they talk about here the 5 steps to crafting a resilient and diversified portfolio, so let's get into this. First, clarify your investment objectives. Begin by defining your investment goals, whether you're planning for retirement, saving for college, for one of your children, or again, any other milestones. You have to understand these objectives because it allows you to determine the appropriate time frame for achieving them. Longer-term goals can be achieved with greater risk tolerance. Folks, this one sounds like it's pretty obvious, but it's important. Much of the financial industry goes straight to the portfolio and talking about investment strategies, all while skipping the planning that comes before that. That's kind of like getting into a car and starting to drive before you really even know where you're going. What road should you take? Are highways an option? What's the traffic look like? And what time do you need to get there? And something that's especially critical for retiring federal employees is that your objective is going to be financial independence. Now that looks very different for a lot of people, but for the most part, that's the goal. So once you've achieved the enough money status, then what? How do you stay retired? First, you have to develop a plan around your objectives. What does cash flow look like in retirement? You have to adjust that for inflation so that over time you're accounting for higher spending. You have to throw in variabilities like markets, economy, your health, changes to your objectives. And only then can you figure out what kind of investment strategy is going to help you to meet those goals. Remember, your portfolio's job in retirement is to create cash flow. So first, you need to understand what cash flow looks like. Okay, moving on. The next one that we have here, establish an asset allocation. Asset allocation involves dividing your capital into various investment categories or buckets. This should be a familiar term to you if you've seen my past videos. I've used this term and talked about the bucketed approach. We'll throw an example up on the screen. If you haven't seen it, you should go check that out. So here they suggest consider your allocations first, stocks, bonds, and cash. So this is very high level. We haven't gotten into the details yet. And again, the optimal allocation depends on your risk tolerance and investment time horizon. The words I want you to put in place of risk tolerance and investment horizon are both your attitude and aptitude towards taking risk. I think these 2 terms will help you to remember much more clearly than some of this lingo that we have in the business, but it effectively means the same thing. How much are you willing to tolerate in market volatility, and how much growth do you have to achieve over time to meet your objectives? Remember that before retirement, your portfolio only has one single job. What is it? Grow. And let's be honest, putting your money into the CS&I funds and the TSP and looking away for 30 years is probably one of the better things you can do as far as an investment plan when you are still early in your career as a federal employee. Doing that and not getting out at the wrong time, making sure you're still contributing, over time, that gives you a really good chance of building a very large portfolio. But again, it's over time. Now, that same strategy that allows somebody to be really successful before retirement absolutely does not work for a retired federal employee. In fact, doing that same thing in retirement is a sure way to get an early end to your retirement than you might have expected. Remember, in retirement, your portfolio's job is very different. Instead of you supporting it, now it supports you. It's almost like managing your money in reverse, and your portfolio has a lot more responsibilities now. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have selecting asset classes. Delve deeper into asset class selection, focusing on diversification within stocks or bonds. You want to diversify across industries, sectors, geographical regions in equities. And when it comes to bonds, we're looking at government, corporate, municipal bonds in fixed income. I'd also incorporate here some sort of money market or other cash equivalents. And the bonds should be varying in maturities and credit qualities. Although the array of available asset classes offer immense opportunities, it could be overwhelming. So, folks, they really hit the nail on the head here, but there's a lot to unpack. So let's look at this one carefully. The name of the game in retirement is to get enough growth in your portfolio so that you can keep risk as low as possible while still being able to meet all of your financial objectives. What are your financial objectives? Refer back to the original plan that was created that modeled out what kind of cash you're going to need, when you're going to need it, and so forth. So now you're starting to see why it's so important that we begin with the plan before we look at the investments. Okay, so they talk about diversifying across sectors and different industries. Why is this important? Well, sometimes one group of companies may not perform as well as another group of companies. And this is usually because it's a different season in the economy. So sometimes healthcare companies do better in a certain season, and other times technology and growth companies do better while healthcare companies maybe don't do so well. And as the seasons shift, we start to see other companies do better while others don't perform as well. If you're diversified across multiple different sectors, then you increase your chances of making sure that your portfolio is giving you the growth that you need over time. And while doing that, you're also reducing volatility because you're spreading out the risk. In the advisory business, we call this correlation. If all of your investments are positively correlated, then you are not well diversified because most of your portfolio is going to behave identically to each other. And if the markets start to go down, a lot of your portfolio could go down with it because they're all very similar. Okay, you don't want a portfolio that all of the investments behave like each other. Now, this is one of the biggest challenges in the TSP, and frankly, why the mutual fund window was introduced in the first place. Federal employees needed greater diversification beyond just the CS, IF, and G funds, and so the TSP was forced to give you access to these thousands of other choices now for a small portion of your TSP account. Now, I want to show you what happens to even a strong retirement plan if the investments are not set up correctly. And back to help us with this example, we've got Mr. and Mrs. Sample Client once again. And here we are looking at their retirement projection, and things look really good. Okay, long term, when we look at the probabilities of success that they have in their plan, we're talking about a 95% probability of success here in their plan. So this is including doing extra travel. Okay, so they have a really strong plan in this scenario. Now, I want to show you what happens to this scenario if we introduce a poorly invested portfolio where we see a bear market early in retirement and they weren't well diversified. They were not protecting themselves against this kind of risk, which could always be right around the corner. We don't know. That's the challenge with the investment markets. So when we turn this on, I want to show you what happens to their long-term projection. Things look pretty stark here. So big difference, because as they're spending and we have a bear market at the same time, we've introduced sequence of returns risk. And this is one of the greatest risks to a retirement plan. And as we look at probabilities of success, now things look really tough. We're at less than 60% probability of success. And reason being, because remember, these portfolio withdrawals right here, early in retirement, you can see that the pension income doesn't quite take up all of their expenses. So they're going to have to take portfolio withdrawals pretty heavily until Social Security starts, which is this navy color here. And if these heavy spending years also come with a poor portfolio allocation, that could be the very thing that sets the retirement plan on a trajectory of failure later on. And here's the key too, folks. If we look at this, how does this family really know that they're on a poor trajectory? Well, it might not be until a number of years until they actually realize, hey, we're in trouble here. We're going to have to change our retirement plan. And maybe we can't do that travel anymore. Maybe we can't do that home renovation that was so important to us, and now only be able to survive in retirement. So the CFP board talks about diversifying among various different sectors. Which ones should you consider? Well, you should consider all of them because at any given moment, one might be doing well, the other's not, like we talked about. Now, there's too many for us to talk about, so we're going to throw a graphic on the screen, and that way you can see all of the main sectors that are out there, and you can take a screenshot or take a photo and use this in your own planning. Now, they also talk about geographical regions. If you've been watching the iFund this year, it's no surprise to you how well it's doing. Okay, that's because international stocks have less correlation to US stocks. And so even though US stocks are doing well this year, international is doing even better. There are some years that international does well even when US stocks aren't doing well at all. And so this kind of diversification is really important. And you want to make sure, folks, that you are in those investments before the economic change occurs that starts that new cycle for the new sector. Okay, you don't want to jump on a moving train, which is, by the way, what we saw a lot of federal employees do this year, right? As the iFund was going up and up and up, we saw tons of federal employees pouring into the iFund. Maybe that was a good decision, but you can't know that it's already peaked and going to start its decline again. So you got to be really careful. And last, when they talk about bonds with varying maturity and different credit qualities, folks, bonds are a totally different animal and totally different tool in your retirement. I don't like people to compare bonds to the F fund and the TSP because that's a very specific way of using bonds. And there's a lot of other ways that a federal retiree can and should use bonds for their retirement. Not necessarily how the F fund does it. Okay, moving on. Here they're talking about choose investments wisely. Once you've determined the asset classes, which is what we just talked about, selecting individual investments becomes pivotal. So here's what they're saying. Let's say that your total portfolio allocation, pretend this is just your portfolio, let's say it's 55% in stocks and the remaining 45% in bonds. Of that 55% that you have in stocks, you might decide that only 15% of that 55% is going to be inside large cap stocks. What is large cap? This is like the TSP C fund, or in other words, the S&P 500. Okay, so we're talking about big companies here. So now what? Now that you know this much is going to be in large cap, there is a wide universe of investment funds out there that you can use as large cap options for your portfolio. Which one is the right one for you? And then once you figure out that structure, then who are the players that you are considering? Are we using a Vanguard fund? Are we using a BlackRock fund? Are we using a Schwab fund? Okay, there's so many different managers out there, and you have to do the research to understand what are the portfolio mandates for each one of those fund managers, and is that the right one for your portfolio? So again, you can meet your financial objectives over time. Okay, so then you took care of the 15% of your 55% in stocks. What about the remaining 45%? Well, you're looking at small cap stocks, you're looking at value stocks, all of the different ones, and you want to go through the same process for each of those. And then the same is true when you get to bonds. What kinds of bonds and which ones are going to serve you best? Okay, I would also add to this that in this bond category, you might want to consider something like your money markets or other sorts of fixed income, not just stick to using bonds. Okay, this next section here, regular portfolio rebalancing. Maintain diversification by periodically rebalancing your portfolio. Rebalancing involves restoring your asset classes to their original allocation percentages. Why would we need to do that? Well, if stocks outperform and become a significant portion of the portfolio because they grew to bigger levels, so now they make up a bigger part of your portfolio, rebalancing entails reducing the stock position and then reallocating the proceeds back into the other parts of the portfolio. In this case, they say bonds or cash. This prevents overexposure to certain asset classes that may have experienced recent growth but could be overvalued. Folks, I cannot overstate how important this is. As stocks do better and make up bigger parts of your portfolio, it is increasing the risk in your portfolio at the same time. This is something that a lot of people don't realize. And so suddenly your portfolio is way off from the original risk levels and volatility tolerance that should have been appropriate for your plans and what you're trying to accomplish. And so as we continue here, economic fluctuations, market shifts, geopolitical events, these are all things that influence investments and diversification. Stay adaptable. Be prepared to adjust your portfolio accordingly. Regularly assess your investment strategy in response to changing circumstances. This means that you're staying nimble and changing as things change. I recently had a conversation with a client who was thinking about selling their house and moving to a new home. How does that change their portfolio? Well, they're already retired, so we have the conservative bucket pretty well established already. But beyond moving, they're going to have to put some money into their current house to be able to sell it. And then they're considering doing renovations on the new house that they're going to move to. So this means that we need to look at that conservative bucket again and say, hey, is this the right amount in the conservative bucket? Are these allocations in the conservative bucket still appropriate? Because now we're going to need extra cash to use maybe here really soon, depending on how quickly they close on the new house. Even if something in your life isn't changing, the economy always is. For example, money markets, if you might have noticed, depending on when you're watching this, they're not paying as much as they used to. I've seen a lot of high yield savings from bank accounts that are paying 2.5%, 3% at most these days. And meanwhile, there are money markets out there at the same time that are still paying over 4%. And so if you're not on top of these things, you're missing out on an entire percentage point on just one small variable. And there are dozens of other things just like this that help you to make sure that you're getting the most out of your money. And if you're a retiring Fed and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take a moment, do so right now, leave a comment or a like. That really helps to spread this message to other federal employees. And until next time, stay wise and stay wealthy.